Mortal Kombat has been sneaking characters from other universes into its roster for over 15 years now. From horror icons to comic book gods to 80s action stars, the franchise has basically become the world's most violent crossover event. So today, I'm breaking down every single Mortal Kombat crossover and everything behind them, starting with the one that nearly killed the franchise, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Before Mortal Kombat ever ripped the spine out of a horror villain or punched a superhero through a building, it had to survive the most awkward crossover in fighting game history. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe dropped on November 16, 2008 for PS3 and Xbox 360. It was the 8th main installment developed by Midway Games. It featured a balanced roster of 11 MK characters and 11 DC characters, with a story centered around Dark Khan, a grotesque fusion of Darkseid and Shao Kahn created when both villains attacked interdimensional portals at the exact same time, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets complicated. DC had rules. Superman and Batman could not murder people. That's kind of their whole thing. So Midway invented heroic brutalities, where DC heroes would absolutely destroy their opponents, but technically leave them alive. Superman could beat you within an inch of your life, then stop just short of finishing the job. Very heroic, very polite. The problem was obvious. Mortal Kombat is built entirely on excessive violence, and DC walked in and said tone that down by about 90%. The gore was gutted, fatalities were neutered, fans were furious. But here's the thing, this game mattered. It proved MK characters could coexist with outside IP. It was the foundation every future crossover was built on, and it carries a bittersweet weight because this was the last Mortal Kombat game Midway ever made. The studio filed for bankruptcy in 2009. This was a dying studio's final big swing, and love it or hate it, it changed everything. But if you think DC heroes playing nice was a weird fit, wait until you see what Sony demanded for their exclusive guest character. Mortal Kombat 9, Kratos. Kratos from God of War was the first ever guest character in Mortal Kombat history, and honestly, he was kind of the perfect pick. A guy who literally rips gods apart with his bare hands, showing up in a game about ripping people apart with your bare hands. The tonal overlap is almost suspicious. He debuted in Mortal Kombat 2011, exclusive to the PlayStation 3 and PS Vita versions. And that word exclusive is where this story gets interesting. See, Sony didn't just suggest Kratos, they paid for him. Console exclusivity deal, the whole 9 yards, which meant if you were playing on Xbox 360, you got 0 guest characters. Nothing. Just the base roster and a vague sense of disappointment. Here's the thing, NetherRealm originally planned to give Xbox players their own exclusive fighter. The rumored pick was Master Chief, Spartan 117 himself, ripping spines out in 1080p, but it never happened. The deal fell through, and Xbox players were left standing outside the party, watching through a window. Nobody ever got a full explanation for why it was canceled either. I don't know what to tell you. As for Kratos himself, his implementation is genuinely impressive. Both of his fatalities, Blade of Olympus and Medusa's Gaze, were pulled directly from the God of War weapon set and translated into MK's gore system with brutal precision. He didn't feel like a marketing stunt shoved into a fighting. He felt like he belonged there, and that's the part people forget. Kratos proved that an outside character could feel completely native to Mortal Kombat's combat system. He set the template that every single guest character after him would follow. To this day, he remains the only console-exclusive guest fighter in the franchise's history. But Kratos wasn't the only outsider to crash Mortal Kombat 2000. The next one came straight from your nightmares, literally. Mortal Kombat 9. Freddy Krueger. Here's the thing about Freddy Krueger. He's a dream demon. That's his whole deal. He can only kill you when you're asleep. So how do you take a character whose entire power set requires his victims to be unconscious and drop him into a fighting game where everyone is very much awake and punching each other in the face? You give him a pact with the Elder Gods, which is, not ideal for everyone else. Released on August 9th, 2011, Freddy was the first DLC guest character available across all platforms in Mortal Kombat history. Kratos was cool, but he was locked behind PlayStation's Velvet Rope. Freddy was for everyone, priced at $4.99, and based on Wes Craven's 1984 original A Nightmare on Elm Street. The lore justification was genuinely clever. Rather than just throwing him in and hoping nobody asked questions, NetherRealm wrote an actual canonical explanation. Freddy had struck a deal with the Elder Gods that gave him the ability to kill in the waking world. So now, instead of haunting teenagers in their sleep, he's out here throwing hands with Scorp broad daylight. Career pivot of the century. His moveset leaned hard into the nightmare aesthetic. Signature moves like Hellspike and Sweet Dreams kept the Dream Demon flavor intact, and his fatalities were named Tell 'em Freddy, Sent Ya, and Welcome to My Nightmare. Both pulled directly from the films. Both absolutely disgusting. Great stuff. But Freddy's real legacy isn't his moveset, it's what he started. This one $4.99 download fundamentally rewired how NetherRealm approached DLC forever. Before Freddy, guest characters were a novelty. After Freddy, they became the strategy. Every horror icon, every action hero, every comic book character that showed up in later games traces directly back to this moment. Freddy didn't just join the roster, he kicked the door open, and the characters that walked through it next, they invaded someone else's universe entirely. Injustice, Gods Among Us. Every crossover we've talked about so far has been the same formula. Take someone from outside Mortal Kombat, drop them into the blood pit, and see what happens. But in 2013, NetherRealm flipped the entire script. Instead of bringing guests into Mortal Kombat, they sent Mortal Kombat's poster boy into someone else's game. Injustice, Gods Among Us, launched on April 16th, 2013, and it was DC's house. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the whole Justice League roster duking it out in a fighting game built from the ground up for comic book heroes. The DLC lineup reflected that. Lobo, Batgirl, Zod, Martian Manhunter, Zatanna, all DC, all the time. And then there was Scorpion, released on May 27th, 2013, priced at $4.99 or free with the season pass. Scorpion was the third DLC character and the only fighter on the entire roster who wasn't from DC Comics. He walked into a game full of gods and aliens and said, "Yeah, I belong here," which is already bold. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't just belong, he dominated. Competitive players noted that Injustice Scorpion was probably the strongest Scorpion has ever been in any game, period. His moveset translated so well into the DC fighting system that he became a legitimate terror in tournament play. The teleport punch, the spear, the Hellfire setups, all of it hit different when the rest of the cast was designed around a completely different combat philosophy. He wasn't just viable, he was arguably overpowered in someone else's game, on someone else's turf, and it didn't stop there. Sub-Zero later followed as the second DLC character in Injustice 2, making him the second MK representative to cross into DC's fighting universe. The pipeline officially flowed both directions. This was the proof of concept nobody asked for, but everybody needed. Mortal Kombat characters weren't just good enough to share a roster with horror icons and action heroes. They could invade a completely different franchise and run the place. But if you think Scorpion terrorizing the DC universe sounds fun, wait until NetherRealm started rating the classic horror archives for Mortal Kombat 10. Mortal Kombat X, Horror Icons. Jason Voorhees is the first character in Mortal Kombat history who can literally die and come back in the same match. Let that sink. When Jason gets knocked out, his unstoppable variation kicks in with a resurrection mechanic, and he stands back up with partial health based on how much super meter he had when he went down. It's not a comeback mechanic, it's not a second wind, that is a dead man getting off the floor because he's not done, and his relentless variation might be even more terrifying than the resurrection. It gives Jason a persistent dark aura that damages opponents just for being near him, plus the ability to teleport. So you're dealing with this enormous masked psychopath who can appear right behind you at any moment, punishing you for even trying to create distance. There is no safe space on the screen. If that doesn't sound exactly like every Friday the 13th movie you've ever seen, I don't know what to tell you. NetherRealm didn't just put Jason in the game. They turned every match against him into a horror where you're the victim. Then there's Leatherface, who honestly might be the deeper cut of the two. He's shipped with 3 variations, and each one references a completely different era of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Killer gave him brutal up-close chainsaw strikes for relentless pressure. Butcher turned him into a raw damage machine with berserker-style offense. And Pretty Lady, which is exactly as unsettling as it sounds, gave him a more versatile toolkit with his hammer and added range options. 3 variations, 3 different films, 3 different ways to carve someone up. That's the kind of detail that only horror fans would catch, and it's exactly why it works. Together, these two basically confirmed that Mortal Kombat wasn't just dabbling in horror crossovers anymore. This was a full commit. But if you think slashers were the wildest thing NetherRealm pulled from the movie, wait until you see what crawled out of the sci-fi section of the Kombat pack. Mortal Kombat X, Sci-Fi Predators. If Jason and Leatherface were the slashers, Predator and Alien were the sci-fi nightmares. And honestly, NetherRealm might have outdone themselves with these two. Predator dropped as the third DLC character in MKX's Kombat pack around July 2015, and he played exactly like you'd want him to. Cloaking device, plasma caster, wrist blades, the whole arsenal. But the real kicker was his armor procs. Certain attacks had built-in armor that made them functionally unblocked, meaning if you committed to a move, you were eating. No trading, no interrupting, just pure tactical superiority, which is, exactly how the Predator operates in the 1987. He doesn't trade blows, he picks you apart. Then came the Alien, and this is where things got genuinely innovative. The game referred to it as Xenomorph to sidestep some trademark headaches, but the real story was its gameplay. The Alien was the first character in Mortal Kombat history designed as a host fighter. It could infect opponents and temporarily transform them, directly mirroring the parasitic life cycle from the films. Nobody had ever built a fighting game character around that concept before. It wasn't just a cool skin slapped onto generic moves. The entire kit was reverse engineered from the source material, and naturally, you could pit them against each other. Alien versus Predator inside a Mortal Kombat arena, a crossover within a crossover. The community absolutely ate it up. But here's where it gets complicated. Both the Alien and Predator franchises were owned by Century Fox, which meant the licensing agreements were tangled up in Hollywood IP negotiations from the start. Guest characters like these are typically locked into limited-term deals, and once those expire, their long-term availability in the game becomes genuinely uncertain. They're some of the most legally precarious guest fighters ever included in a fighting game. You could buy them one day and wonder if they'd still be downloadable the next. Great, add that to the list. But if licensing drama over fictional aliens sounds stressful, wait until NetherRealm started raiding the 1980s. Mortal Kombat 11 80s action heroes. NetherRealm did something with Mortal Kombat 11 that nobody saw coming. They put the Terminator and RoboCop in the same game, which sounds like a fun novelty until you realize these two characters already have history together, and almost nobody remembers it. Back in 1992, Dark Horse Comics published a 4-part crossover series, pitting RoboCop against the Terminator. Frank Miller wrote it. It was a massive hit, sold incredibly well, got critical praise, became one of those definitive what-if matchups that comic fans obsessed over for years. And then it just kind of disappeared. The series faded out of public consciousness the way most 90s comic events do, buried under decades of reboots and new IP. By the time MK11 rolled around, most people under 30 had never even heard of it. Then, on May 26, 2020, RoboCop dropped as part of the Aftermath expansion, and suddenly that forgotten crossover was alive. Here's the NetherRealm didn't just throw these two into the roster and call it. They built their entire movesets around their film persona. Terminator plays exactly like you'd expect a T-800 play. Relentless forward pressure, heavy armor, walking you down like you owe him money, and he's got all day to collect. RoboCop is the opposite. Calculated, methodical, precision, shooting from range. He's not chasing you. He's waiting for you to make a mistake, like a very polite refrigerator with a gun. The real treat was the intro dialogues. When these two faced each other, the game referenced their shared comic book history direct. Older fans who remembered the Dark Horse series lost their minds. Younger players had zero idea what was being referenced, but thought it was cool anyway, which is basically the best outcome you can hope for with nostalgia bait. You get the people who lived through it feeling seen, and you get the new generation curious enough to Google it afterward. It was a pure generational play. The fans who grew up on these characters are in their 30s and 40s now, and NetherRealm knew exactly what buttons to press. But if you think two 80s action icons sharing a roster is a deep cut, wait until you hear about the comic book character whose creator personally oversaw his Mortal Kombat debut. Mortal Kombat 11, Spawn. This one was years in the making. Spawn had been one of the most fan-requested guest characters in Mortal Kombat, and when I say years, I mean people were begging for this since the MK9 DLCs. Todd McFarlane created the character back in 1992, and he wasn't just passively licensing his creation out, he was personally involved in the development process, showed up at Comic-Con 2019 for the official announcement, and was actively advocating for his character to get the treatment he deserved. And honestly, they delivered. Spawn released as the final character in Combat Pack 1 March 2020. But what made made him special wasn't just the fact that he looked incredible or that his cape physics were absurd, it was what he could actually do in a match. Here's where it gets interesting. Spawn was the first character in Mortal Kombat history with an invisibility mechanic. His third competitive variation allowed him to turn completely invisible. Not translucent, not slightly see-through. Gone. Like he alt-tabbed out of the game. It cost 2 bars of meter to activate, which sounds expensive until you realize what you could do while cloaked. Unblockable setups. Mix-ups your opponent literally could not see coming because they could not see you, which is, you know, not ideal for the person on the receiving end. But the invisibility wasn't even the scariest part of his kit. His War Club special move could break an opponent's breakaway, which is Mortal Kombat 11's version of a combo escape. If Spawn caught you with it, you lost your defensive meter entirely. No escape option, no panic button, just you and an invisible demon with a giant medieval weapon. The competitive community was split. Half thought he was brilliantly designed, a high execution character that rewarded smart resource management. The other half thought he was completely broken. The combination of invisibility, meter denial, and devastating damage made him one of the most mechanically complex guest characters ever added to a fighting game. Todd McFarlane didn't just want Spawn in Mortal Kombat, he wanted Spawn to be a problem. Mission accomplished, but if you think Spawn's kit was wild, wait until you see the roster of crossover characters that showed up in the newest, because Mortal Kombat 1 went absolutely unhinged. Mortal Kombat 1 Comic and Cinematic Killers. Everything Mortal Kombat has been building toward since that first awkward handshake with DC Universe in 2008 culminated here. The guest character strategy for Mortal Kombat 1 didn't just add a few crossover fighters. It assembled the most absurdly diverse roster any fighting game has ever attempted. Homelander from The Boys, Omni-Man from Invincible, Peacemaker from DC. That was Combat Pack 1. Then came Conan the Barbarian, Ghostface from Scream, and the T-1000 from Terminator 2 in later DLC. That's Amazon streaming again, HBO, classic pulp fantasy, slasher horror, and legacy sci-fi cinema, all in one game. I don't know what to tell you. Omni-Man dropped in November 2023, timed perfectly alongside Invincible Season 2, because NetherRealm finally figured out that synergy sells. Homelander followed in spring 2024, and here's where it gets interesting. His moveset included a comic-accurate super scream that has never appeared in the Amazon series. Developers confirmed he'd be flying everywhere with heat vision, serving as his primary differentiator from Omni-Man, which, by the way, having both Homelander and Omni-Man in the same game means you can finally settle the Superman archetype debate that the internet has been screaming about for years. 2 violent Superman knockoffs, 1 arena. Beautiful. The T-1000 was confirmed as a later DLC character, releasing just 52 days after its announcement, and if that sounds familiar, it should. The Terminator franchise bookended MK11's guest roster as the T-800, and now returns in MK1 as the T-1000. Poetic, honestly. But here's the real shit. Every previous crossover pulled from nostalgia. Horror icons from the 80s, action heroes from the 80s, comic characters from the 90s. MK1 pulled from right now. Shows that are currently airing. Characters people are actively talking about on social media. It's not a museum anymore, it's a living, breathing pop culture hub. Fan reception was, predictably, a war zone. Half the community embraced the modern roster as proof that MK had evolved. The other half felt the franchise was losing its identity, becoming too contemporary at the expense of actual martial arts character. This became the most debated DLC lineup in MK history. Cool, add that to the list. But love it or hate it, the result is undeniable. Mortal Kombat has become the Smash Brothers of ultra-violence, the one franchise where a Viltrumite can fight a slasher villain while a liquid metal Terminator waits in the wings. No other game on Earth is doing this, and honestly, no other game could. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.